And welcome into the Bruins Beat on CLNS Media. My name is Evan Marinofsky, and today this is not a normal Bruins Beat. There's no guest. We record, as you guys know, on Mondays, and Monday, because of President's Day and the Bruins being at 1 p.m., made for very tough scheduling. I also have NCAA work to do tonight, so there was no real guest who would be able to slot in with the times I was able to do. So I'm actually recording this between intermissions or between periods, between the first and second period of the Avalanche game. Bruins up 1-0, but that doesn't matter because I was actually kind of happy when this idea came to me. I was like, hey, I haven't done a Q&A with everybody in a while. So nice to be able to do a Q&A. And questions you asked. There were lots of questions. I put it up on Twitter. I put it up on YouTube community, which I was like, oh, I want to make sure I get enough questions. I got way more questions than I ever thought I would. So I appreciate the passion and the questions, and I got to everybody's question. Even if they overlapped, it will get answered. So hope you guys are having a great week. So yes, I love doing these questions, and they all kind of center around the trade deadline. Go figure, right? Go figure, right around the trade deadline. But some of these are future things, future questions. Some of these are current ones. Some of them are lineup questions. They're all pretty interesting. I actually like these questions a lot. There were no like, this again, like no Rask questions. Obviously, he's retired, but so lots of good stuff. We'll dive right in. We will dive straight in. And again, I have it on my notebook. So for people watching on YouTube, I'm holding up. I have a notebook with like all the questions. I have it all written down. I'm a big handwritten note guy. I don't know. I typing on the computer to me doesn't do the same. So having it in a notebook makes it feel more kind of organized. Like I kind of like that a little bit better. Anyways. Gavin on YouTube asks, should the Bruins go after a forward or a defenseman? He likes JT Miller. What would it take to get them? And what I would say is what it's been the entire time. I think you got to go for both, but you can't have the top tier of both. This is something we're going to hit on more and more as the show goes along. You can't have, you don't have enough assets for both. And Connor and I have talked about this, Logan, everyone who's been on have talked about this. And to me, I think the forward you want to go after is JT Miller. He's under contract for another year, good young two-way center, kind of prime of his career type of guy. Maybe a good chance you re-sign him after that. And on defense, if you can get a guy like a Nick Leddy or a Scott Mayfield who can kind of solidify that depth, I think then you're cooking. And again, as I said before, there's not as many options on D, right? You up at center, it feels like there's a lot more than there are on D. And again, I think it comes down to you don't have enough to get Chychrun and Miller or Chychrun and Hurdle. And I also wonder with guys like Mark Giordano, who we'll actually get to in a little bit, does he go back to Calgary? Feels like that might be kind of the move. I don't know if you guys saw the video that Calgary did for him for his comeback with Seattle. It was actually a pretty good video, very good video. So anyways, I think Gavin, you're right. I think JT Miller's the guy. I think that's who would fit best with them. Hurdle, I wonder if it would take a little bit more. Also, I'm very curious with Vancouver if you could get something else with them. If you could get JT Miller and somebody else. So interesting stuff. I do think, though, it's going to have to be both. And again, we're going to get into this in a little bit. I keep saying we're going to get into this a little bit, but we're going to get into it about how with on forward and defense, how maybe this team isn't as close to being a Stanley Cup contender as maybe we thought they would be at the beginning of the season. Anyways, moving along, James on Twitter says, love your pods, Evan. Thank you, James. Bruins to me look like a team that needs toughness all over the roster. They need D that can intimidate and move people out, and forwards that can intimidate with hits and checks. Who can they get in a trade? Delorier, Alexiak, someone like that. So I was kind of going through, because the Bruins needing toughness thing has been a thing that's kind of been going around for a while. And it gets mocked a lot, but I mean, it is something that's real. Like that's, the Blues kind of beat you in 2019 because they were bigger and tougher. So there were two names I have for forwards who are tough and who could maybe contribute. So the first one, and Mike Craddy, got to give Mike Craddy credit for this because it was his idea. He messaged me about this a while back. But Zach McEwen with Philadelphia, if people remember, he fought Tyler Lewington back in like January at the Garden. Carries a cap hit of $825,000. He's a UFA after this year, I believe, or at least he's a UFA. So he's a tough guy. He can contribute, but 4 points in 47 games. Nick Delorier is another one from Anaheim, and that's a really popular one because that could be like Nick Delorier and Hampus Lindholm, right? You could put those together if you wanted to. And a guy like Nick Delorier, again, $1 million cap hit, UFA at the end of the year, that's fine. 8 points in 49 games. And I keeps going back to this. If those two guys are going to be in the lineup, right? They're tough. They're going to hit hard. They'll fight when you need them to, whatever it might be. But your fourth line is kind of fine. Bleed, Nosek, Lazar, like that works right now. And that looks like it's been working for a while. Why break that up for just kind of a goon? Now, again, every time I turn on a Ducks game, Delorier is fighting. And McEwen's definitely a good fighter and a good hitter and all those things. But is that worth a lineup spot? And again, it kind of goes back to stuff Bruce Cassidy said. And like, do you need that? Do you want a guy who can't play? And I don't know if Delorier and McEwen are really the guys. I don't know if they can really truly play in this system. You're kind of seeing it with Nick Foligno right now, which we'll get to in a bit. But I just look at those guys and I go, I don't know. I don't know if you really want that in the lineup. Now on D, I think it's a little bit different. I think, you don't have as many roster spots on D, obviously. So I think you kind of want, you're not going for toughness, so to speak, on D. You'd like some size, but again, you have Forbert. It's kind of getting him to be bigger. As Bruce Cassidy said, be more like a prick. Same with Brandon Carlo. Like, these are bigger guys. Have them impose their will. So I don't think that toughness should be top of the list and things that they need. But it's something that if you can get, sure. But again, as I said, it shouldn't be a big thing that they go after. Another question from Jeremy. Do you think a deal with Seattle can be done? This is an interesting one. The Kraken are be selling off pieces like they're a used car. 2C, Jared McCann, depth scoring, Mojo, or as he like to be called, Jojo. That's Marcus Johansson. Defense, maybe a Giordano, Vince Dunn, Jeremy Lauzon reunion. Not sure if the Bruins could get some of those guys in the package, like JD Stud back in first. This is an interesting one because I was looking at the Kraken stats, and Jared McCann actually leads the Kraken in goals and points. Carries a $2.94 million cap hit. I believe is a UFA at the end of the year. It's not a name that jumps out at me a lot. But again, the production's been there. He's right now listed as the third center on the Kraken, on the Kraken's depth chart. So I don't know if he is going to step in and immediately have that impact. Can you put him between Pastrnak and Hall and kind of get Krejci-like numbers, or at least close to it? And again, I look at, Marcus Johansson. You don't really need a depth winger right now. You kind of got those. And then on defense, Giordano, I think, is probably going to go back to Calgary. I don't know if he's totally what you want. I think if you can get Giordano, great. Like, I think that is kind of an upgrade. Vince Dunn is someone who I think out of those three, because again, Lauzon you had last year. I don't know if Lauzon's really the guy you need. Or he doesn't bring the stability that you want, right? You want a stable depth defenseman. Lauzon doesn't really give you that. Vince Dunn's an interesting one because Vince Dunn, I do think gives you depth on the left side. But if you're carrying a left side of Grzelcyk, Riley, and Dunn, they kind of all do similar things. You kind of you'd like a shutdown presence in there. And I don't know if that kind of gives you it. Now, my whole thing is maybe you do you package, you do a deal where you get Dunn and Jared McCann in a deal, right? So, but to me, that's like a plan D or a plan C or even a plan E. I don't think that's the top of your list. I think that's, as I said, kind of a worst case scenario. Maybe that's what you do. And so for me, I don't know what it would take to get those guys. I think you'd probably have to throw a first in there and some prospects. But again, I don't know. Is that worth it? And again, Sweeney's fairly good at getting crafty with these deadline deals. But again, the Kraken are going to be looking for picks. So you have to think of first is going to have to be in there. So for me, again, I think out of those Kraken guys, I think Dunn and McCann, if you can get those in a package deal, would be kind of the best move. But to me, I don't know if that's what you're really going for, right? You want a legitimate 2C. I don't know if McCann is that, even though he's leading them in points and goals. I don't know if he's really that guy. I keep checking my phone to see if there's updates on the Bruins game because I expect it to keep coming in. So anyways, yes, the Kraken are an interesting team. They're going to be, as I said, they're going to be selling off pieces like a used car. I don't doubt that. On to Sean's question. And Sean hits at a question that I think a lot of people are wondering. Let me pull it up here. Realistically, are the Bruins in a buy or sell position at the deadline? Do they try to make one last run or sell off for the future? Here's what I would say. Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron are on the team. They're going for it, right? Like you got to go for it. And Neely said this in the offseason. When you have those guys in your roster, you've got to go for it. You can't decide to get crafty. You can't sell, like those guys want to win. And again, you also have Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak who are having very good seasons. So you have kind of a core in place. Go for it. Like, again, like this is, you don't get cores like this all the time. There are a lot of teams, as I've said in previous weeks, they would kill for kind of the core that the Bruins have right now. So to me, it feels like they're going to go for it. They absolutely should go for it. I don't think you sell. Selling is a bad idea right now. Because again, then Bergeron's pretty much gone. There's no way Bergeron comes back to like, oh, I want to rejoin a rebuilding franchise. Like, I think you need to buy. That is 100%. I think the move right now. Mike asks an interesting question. See, I have questions on here all scattered about. Mike basically asked, if the Leafs weren't able to unload Nick Ritchie, what do the Bruins need to do to unload DeBrusk? I don't think this is a Nick Ritchie situation where it's like, hey, who can we get this guy to? I think there was a lot of interest around Jake DeBrusk back when he first announced when it first got leaked that he requested a trade. But it comes down to getting the right deal. And we said this at the time, because again, if they did struggling player for struggling player swap, that doesn't help the Bruins at all. But if they can package DeBrusk for someone better right at the deadline, kind of like the Maple Leafs did with Nick Ritchie, where they put Nick Ritchie with a conditional pick, sent him to Arizona. If they can do that, that definitely works, right? Like you're still trying to contend. And also DeBrusk is a valuable piece. Like I know DeBrusk has been struggling of late, hasn't been as good as he's supposed to be. But like, as we've said all this whole time, would it surprise anyone if he went to, anywhere else and scored 25 goals every season? No, it wouldn't. Like he's inconsistent and he's streaky, but again, in a better system with, stuff that fits him and opportunity, I guarantee he's going to do better. So you got to sell that way, right? Like you're getting a potential 25 goal scorer. Teams want that. So you got to kind of entice teams and get the right deal. I think there are teams that would line up for Jake DeBrusk if they said, hey, we'll kind of take anything. But it's getting that right deal. So I don't know if it's really a Nick Ritchie situation, but what a debacle that's been. Poor Nick Ritchie. Ever since he left Anaheim, he's been everywhere. And everywhere it's kind of, it's funny when he first came to Boston, I was like, oh, there's this power forward who's, former first round pick and he makes an impact on the lineup. And then here it was, even after he won the 7th player award, it was like, well, he's okay. He does his thing. He kind of skates about out there. There's a weird picture of him with the hair through the helmet and all those things. So, and then you go to Toronto and that's even more scrutiny. And so now he's in Arizona where maybe he's going to get a chance. It's going to be him, Louis Eriksson, and Phil Kessel. That's as I tweeted, that is the real big three. That is the real big three. All right. Ben asks, realistic goal for Lysell. So because we're going to get to Lysell's near future later in this show, we'll say his NHL potential. To me, if Fabian Lysell can come up within the next 5 years and be a stable, consistent top 6 winger in the NHL with the Bruins, preferably on the second right wing slot, right? If he gets brought up, if he's with the Bruins in 2 years and he is the right side behind Pastrnak, you're good. You're good. If he can consistently produce as a second line right winger, and Taylor Hall might be his left wing. When you think about it, like again, if they move Pastrnak back up to the first line, because again, if Fabian Lysell can produce, put him with Hall. And again, this is not like, I don't think this is next year. Fabian Lysell's pretty young. And again, we're getting into Lysell, his near future later. But I think if you want to say, hey, what's a good career for Lysell? What's worth keeping him? If he can be a stable second line right wing, you're cooking. You're cooking. Because again, you have not had one of those in a long time. David Krejci's watching the Czech Republic like, damn, would have killed for that guy when I was here. So realistic goal, stable, consistent, top 6 right wing, preferably on that second line. Jay asks a good question. I just have to find it. I know it's about Sweeney, but he worded it kind of good. So I got to make sure that I get it right. How can Don Sweeney possibly be interested with the inevitable rebuild? Can't draft, can't develop, can't trade, awful in free agency. So there was another question about this later, and I might as well just hit on it now, about Don Sweeney and his, he's a free agent right now. He does not have a contract for next year. Pierre LeBrun said back in September that he sees Sweeney getting re-signed. There's no reason he sees Sweeney getting kicked to the curb or them hiring somebody new, which is kind of annoying to a lot of Bruins fans because I think people outside the market see, oh, they make the playoffs every year, Pastrnak and sort of some of these guys have developed, and Brendan Carlo and Charlie McAvoy, and people kind of leave out the 2015 draft and, Frederick and Beecher and some of those things and some of the free agent signings like Backus. And so it's an interesting case. I had said back after the Bruins lost the Islanders in June that Sweeney probably wasn't the guy going forward. They needed somebody new that could draft better. Now, the draft this past summer was actually pretty good. Like, I think they did well in that draft. They picked the best guys. They did not, look for toughness and grit like they did with Frederick and guys like Beecher. They instead went for the best available, especially with Lysell. Like, I think that was a terrific first round pick. And I don't think that's and even if Lysell doesn't pan out, I don't think you can look back and go, oh, the Bruins blew that pick. Like, no, that was the best guy available at that slot. So I don't think they're headed for a rebuild right now. Again, you've got McAvoy locked up. You got Carlo locked up. You have Swayman in net. You have Ullmark in net for a few more years. Up front, you got Marchand for a little while. The hole is, what do you do about down the middle? That's the big question. Again, Studnicka hasn't really panned out to be a top 6 center in the NHL. Frederick, same thing. Beecher, watch Michigan a little bit. It's tough to tell, but doesn't seem like the top 6 gene is in him. But again, fast kid. So we'll see. He's also young, so who knows? I think they ultimately go with Sweeney going forward. But you're right. I mean, it is sketchy, some of the stuff that he's done in terms of drafting and free agent signings. Even look at last offseason now, the Foligno deal, Holla, Nosek, was it truly worth it? Should they just gone for somebody bigger? Jury's still kind of out on that, I guess, with Foligno, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, it's a good question. But again, I think the reason that Sweeney will stay, they keep making the playoffs. Like, they'll make the playoffs this year. They'll be in. Like, they'll be competitive. They're going to buy at the deadline, and they'll be a competitive team, which is what they want. So it's hard to say, hey, goodbye, buddy. Like, see ya. Especially to a guy like Don Sweeney, who's friends with Cam Neely and has been in this organization for a long time. Like, it's not easy to just be like, see ya. So for me, I do look at Sweeney and I say, well, he's probably going to be here next year and in the future years. You hope that the drafting gets better. You hope that the free agent signings are a lot better. But I don't think they're going to go into a straight rebuild. I think this team cares a lot about making the playoffs. So I do think ultimately they're going to kind of do a rebuild on the fly, which Sweeney did kind of execute fairly well. I don't think like the rebuild on the fly between like 2015 and 2017 wasn't all that bad. Like, they got them into contention pretty quick, back in the cup final a few years later. So for me, it's a good question. And it's one that I think in a perfect world, you would get a new general manager. But given what they have and given the situation, I don't see him going anywhere. And I think he will be entrusted with the next rebuild. An interesting one that Alex asked, he said, think the Bruins will look to attach a draft pick or prospect to either Foligno. Whoops, dropped my phone. Think the Bruins will look to attach a draft pick or prospect to either Foligno or more in the offseason to get rid of their cap hits. I will do you one better. The buyout market. I think they buy him out. I think they buy out Nick Foligno this offseason. I think that is it. So here's, if the Bruins were to buy out Nick Foligno this offseason, the cap hit for 22-23 for Nick Foligno would be 1.9 million. And the next year it would be 933,000. Again, very palatable cap hits, very palatable. And I think ultimately would not be surprised to see them buy out Nick Foligno. It just, again, he's been in the lineup. He's in the lineup on Monday. Like, he's a really good personality and a fun guy. But I don't think that, they keep him next year. I think they buy him out. That would be my guess. Just given the money, I don't think the money's too bad to buy him out. And again, you can use his roster spot for a younger guy, or somebody else, like getting a better fit. Again, it just kind of comes down to Nick Foligno's game doesn't really fit the Bruins. Like, I think Nick Foligno's game would have fit the Bruins 5 years ago, but not now. The game's gotten fast. Cassidy wants to play fast. Foligno doesn't fit that. And so it's nothing against him. It just isn't a fit. And his game is sort of looking a little bit older this season. John Moore is an interesting one. Again, John Moore's buyout cap hit of 1.25 million, next season, cap hit of 750,000. The season after that, which would be 2023, 24. Again, that's palatable numbers to buy him out. So again, I wouldn't be surprised to see a John Moore buyout either. So those two might not even have to get, you might not have to give a pick or a prospect, just buy them out. Like, I think that might be more the move with those two guys. Greg asked on Twitter, likelihood Sweeney's resigned. I would say it's fairly high, as I just said. Like, I don't see him not getting re-signed. Just given again, if this was an outside general manager, if this was a guy they hired off the street a few years ago, then it's different. But again, he's been in the organization, knows it, like former Bruin. I don't see them moving on from him. Jacob asked for year-by-year oral history of the Bruins dating back all the way to 1924. Jacob, let's start right now. We'll do it straight through. No, hell yeah, that'd be so fun. A podcast, just an oral history, just going through the hockey reference page of like every single thing that happened every year. Milt Schmidt scored this game, and we get all into those things. But yes, very interesting history. We'll not be going through it in full. Usually I try to keep the episodes between like 30 and like 40 minutes. That would be much longer, much longer. And I think there's some years recently that people wouldn't want to hear an oral history of, just bringing back some bad memories. DK Score Fantasy Points asks, should the Bruins be selling instead of buying? I just don't see any addition giving the Bruins a good shot at the cup. That's a valid point. So here's my counter to this, because I think, DK, I think you're right. And Gavin asked this on YouTube community as well. So both of you guys, I think you have a real point. If you add JT Miller to this lineup, are you now better than the Maple Leafs or the Lightning? Probably not. No, I don't think you're favored against those guys. And again, my prediction for the second half was that the Bruins like upset the Panthers in the first round. I believe that still could happen. But against Tampa, does JT Miller like set you over them? I don't think so. Getting Lindholm, Handfist Lindholm on the back end, or a depth guy on D, does that set you above those teams? No. But here's why you go for it. A lot of people forget 2019, the reason they were in the cup had less to do with them and more to do with everybody else. Tampa was out. Remember, they faced Toronto in the first round, beat them in the first round as they usually do. Second round, they faced Columbus because Columbus beat Tampa. And then they didn't have to face Washington or a tougher team in the Eastern Conference Final because they got Carolina. And then they got St. Louis in the cup, which should have been a win. So again, the NHL playoffs are weird. They're crazy. Anything can happen. Now, am I saying this is going to happen again where the seas are going to part and you're going to have a straight shot to the cup? No, but it could happen. And I don't think the Bruins want to be in a position where they don't do anything at the deadline or they sell and then they see the playoffs are just complete bananas and they go, oh my God, we could have played, so-and-so. We could have played, a much less good team than we thought we could have in the second round. And Montreal made it to the cup final last year. Like, anything can happen. And I think this group sincerely believes so long as we make the playoffs, we're fine. Like, we can make anything happen. So I think that's why you buy. And it goes back again, you have Marchand and Bergeron, but it also goes back to like anything can happen. So for me, I totally understand, again, this is not like the Avalanche who, if they got Claude Giroux, are now like a juggernaut. If you get JT Miller, it's short, it definitely fills a hole near the future and far out. But I don't know, it comes down to anything can happen in the postseason. Bruins Watcher asked me, how many 50-goal seasons are you projecting for Fabian Lysell? Over under 7.5. I say he has 27. He plays for 27 seasons and scores 50 goals in all 27 of those seasons. Might even have more than 50 in some of those seasons. Going to score all over the place. No, I think he's going to be a very, very solid NHL forward. That's what I get. That's what I'm predicting. I think he will be skilled. As I said, as long as you can get, stable, consistent scoring out of him, you're good. Like, that's worth it. Trevor Stoneman asked, odd man out if they add on defense. This is a good question. If they add on defense, there's going to be at least one player that's the odd man out. And who do you think that'll be? My money's on Clifton, but then that leaves them weak on the right side. So it depends. I think if the Bruins add a left shot defenseman, it's much more interesting because it's either going to be Riley or Forbert out depending on matchups. Now you also have to consider Urho Vakanainen. Now Urho Vakanainen could be going back in a deal But if he stays, let's just say like it's all the defensemen they have. Vakanainen's probably out. It's also just whoever's hot, right? Like Cassidy usually just rides with the hot hand in his lineup. So, if Forbert's playing extremely well at the time, they go with Forbert. If Riley's playing really well or Vakanainen, that's what they go for. My guess would be if they had a left shot. Let's say they had like Hampus Lindholm, right? Let's say they had Hampus Lindholm. Just saying it. They had Hampus Lindholm. It would be Grzelcyk, Lindholm on the left side for sure. And then I would guess that Patrice Bergeron just scored. I just got a notification about it. You won't be seeing a GIF from me, unfortunately, but Patrice Bergeron did just score. It doesn't matter to you guys because you're listening way after, so it doesn't even matter for you. But again, if they get Lindholm, it would be Lindholm and Grzelcyk on the left side. Then you're rotating through Riley, Forbert, Vakanainen, and that's based on matchups. If you're playing a bigger, more physical team, you're putting Forbert in the lineup. If you're facing a faster team where you need more puck movers, you're going with Riley. So I think it comes down to matchups. Now, maybe they could move a guy over to the right side to take over for Clifton. But I think they like kind of having that right shot defenseman. I also think if they added a right shot defenseman, I think it's definitely Clifton's the odd man out. I don't think it's even like a question. Again, if they went out and added Scott Mayfield, you would have McAvoy, Carlo, Mayfield. Even though Carlo's been way under expectation this year, you still need him, and he's still important, and you still hope he breaks out. So to me, Clifton would then be the odd man out. So I think it comes down to just matchup, especially on that left side with defense. But it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting little conundrum they have. So it's a conundrum. Okay, so one question, I said we would get to this about Fabian Lysell. Benjamin Dollymount and David on YouTube asked questions around Lysell's future. Benjamin said, eventually when the WHL season comes to an end, what do you think best fits Lysell? Playing the rest of this year in Providence, or trying it with Boston, or another opinion? So I am not as familiar with the WHL and kind of the developmental path as I am with like college hockey, right? College hockey, I always say like 2 years. For instance, like I tweeted the Luke Hughes goal that he had against Ohio State, which was just insane. I mean, just like watching that live was like, holy crap. Like, I don't think like just a Luke Hughes aside, that kid's going to be freaking good. Like better than Quinn. He's bigger. He skates just as well. He's got great edges, like ridiculous skill, good in his own end, but play another year. Like I always believe 2 years is a good point for especially really elite college players. Do 2 years. Always do 2 years. It can never hurt, because I always say, I guess it's Cale Makar bias from UMass, but like you look at Cale Makar and some others, it's just like do 2 years. You're seeing it with Owen Power this year a bit. So I can't speak to WHL as well as I could with college hockey, but what I will say, seeing him in Providence would be really good. I think he's ready. He's tearing up the WHL this year. I believe he has like 38 points in 32 games. So for me, I think he is absolutely someone who could fit right into Providence. And I don't think he'll come to Boston. I don't think that that's going to take place as quick. And again, I think a lot of people make the Pastrnak comparison. And not to be cliche, but every player's developmental path is so much different than the other. So I wouldn't be totally comparing it to David Pastrnak. However, I would say that getting him in Providence this year, I think would be good for his development. I think ultimately like that would be a good move. But yeah, I mean, there was a goal he had the other night in the WHL, and like he stuck behind the D and got a great breakaway. Like I think he's going to be very good. We'll get into there's another question about Lysell later, even nearer future about this deadline, where we're talking about some interesting points with him. Bruins fan 71 asked who are the Bruins scouting and why. I cannot confirm anything at this time about who they're scouting because again, they never really say who. They're just like at games. And scouts have to go to games anyway, so it's hard to tell like which ones for trades and stuff like that. My guess is, and this is not like confirmed or reports, but my guess is they're scouting, potential second line centers and defense. I also think they're looking at guys who are not your typical targets. So kind of like Charlie Coyle was a few years ago, where like those were not the biggest fish in the pond. Because again, the Bruins do not have all these assets that other teams like the Wild might or the Rangers might. So I think it's also outside the box thinking too, but big moves still. So nothing confirmed on that front, but that would be my guess to that. So Nick Nick Krasko asked me through Twitter DMs, which is also fine. You can totally ask me stuff through there as long as it's reasonable, right? Nothing crazy. He asked me two questions. One centered around, does Don Sweeney go all in? And the second being around, he would trade Fabian Lysell only for a legit NHL center under contract because Bruins are not good at developing forward. So we'll start with Sweeney. Does Sweeney go all in? I believe he does. Yes, I think you have to. Again, I know, as I said earlier, like you're not better than Florida or Toronto or Tampa on paper, and I don't think the deadline is going to get you there. But I still think you got to try. You owe it to Bergeron, you owe it to Martian, you owe it to the fans, you owe it to everybody to try. And you have enough assets to make moves. Like, again, you have Jake DeBrusk, you have Studnicka, you have first round picks, you have Vakanainen. Are those as hot as some of the other teams' offers? No. And I guess in a worst case scenario, you have Mason Lowry and I guess Swayman, which now would be very hard to trade because Tuukka Rask is gone. So this hits it. The next question would you trade Fabian Lysell? Really comes down to that. I understand the idea. And by the way, if Don Sweeney traded Fabian Lysell at this deadline, he would 100% be going all in. That's a sign that he's 100% going all in. To me, I would only do that if that's all the team will take. If Vancouver says we are only doing deals around Fabian Lysell, then you have to consider it because JT Miller would be a legitimate addition to this team. He's under contract for another year, and you can maybe get him to re-sign. Same with San Jose with a Tomas Hertl, right? He's not under contract for another year, but if you can get kind of that verbal, like, I'm going to re-sign, I want to re-sign, then that's good too. But it's tough to give up a guy like Lysell. So the other interesting point Nick makes is this team has not been great at developing forwards. You can go down the list, Bjork and DeBrusk and Heinen, like they're not great at it. We've talked about this on this podcast and poked the bear numerous times. This is not like a well-kept secret. Everybody knows this. But for a guy like Lysell, he gives you, and there's a reason people keep kind of mentioning Pastrnak with him, and not that they're the same, but Lysell kind of has that ceiling of like, this could be a really elite player. Now, granted, DeBrusk was another one who people thought, okay, he's going to be a goal scorer in the NHL. So it's the same kind of thing. And again, Jack Studnicka was also a guy who coming out, people were like, this is the next guy down the middle. This is the heir to Patrice Bergeron. And that has not happened yet. It doesn't seem like that's ever going to happen. So to me, I'm hesitant to deal Lysell unless it's for a much better player, again, who you can keep under contract. But I mean, again, the idea of how it comes down to, I guess, if you want to put it like in easiest terms, it comes down to, do you want the potential of a really elite really elite top six winger in Lysell, or do you want kind of a current fix to the center situation where you have a potential top six winger or top six center, excuse me, in JT Miller or Tomas Hertl? Comes down to that. Now, I just have a tough time giving up on a really top prospect. But another thing to think about with these things, think of how many, along with the fact that the Bruins have not been good at developing forwards, they've also tanked the value of their forwards, right? Danton Heinen and Ryan Donato and Jake DeBrusk. And you can go out through the list of these guys who the value has gone down so much. I mean, there were talks Jake DeBrusk could be dealt for, I believe it was like Ryan McDonough a few years ago. And again, there's these deals and these forwards who they just kind of let the value plummet. So this is kind of like a stock, not to get too big into stock talk here, but it's kind of like, you've got this really promising young player. Are you going to invest and say, hey, we predict that this guy is going to be a cornerstone of this team for the next 12 years, 15 years? Or, hey, we're going to sell him really high and get someone we know can come in and make an impact. And then I kind of get hung up on, well, you want the guy to come in and make the impact, like JT Miller. But do you think you're actually are you sure that you can be a cup contender within the next 2 to 3 years with JT Miller and Martian and Pastrnak? Like, then it becomes that. So it comes down to, do you have a plan at center? And do you really want to give up a guy like Fabian Lysell? I still would rather not give up Fabian Lysell. I would rather hold on to him and again, trading Lysell would be the last option. But if Vancouver says, hey, we're not going to ask for a first, we just want Lysell and, another couple prospects or something like that, then maybe you got to listen to it. But again, I wouldn't want to trade Lysell. I wouldn't want to trade Low Rye. I wouldn't want to trade Swayman. Those are my 3 untouchables in the system right now. So, and by the way, the questions that Nick asked, Connor with 1 N asked a similar question about Sweeney going all in. Connor with 1 N. Connor with 1 N isn't even here today. Connor Ryan. Yeah, we hit on all the questions. I don't even know how long this went because I'm not recording this in the normal way that I record it, so I don't have the timer. I hope I answered all of your questions to the best of your hopes and to best of my abilities. But very interesting stuff, a lot of deadline stuff, toughness, and Sweeney, a lot of Lysell, a lot of Fabian Lysell stuff. Maybe I'll name this episode like, should the Bruins trade Fabian Lysell? Let everybody kind of get all in a huff about it. Anyways, we'll do this more. I think people have been wondering about this. I saw someone ask this on YouTube, and I apologize for not getting back to you on YouTube and getting back through here. But someone had asked, can we do like a live Q&A with you and Connor? And yes, I think we absolutely can. Right now, it's just I'm very busy with NCAA.com stuff and other things. So that just hasn't happened yet. But I imagine around the playoff time, why not? That'd be so fun. Me and Connor just answering your questions, sitting back, just having a good time. That's my first sip of water, by the way, this entire episode. So I went a long time without having to take a drink. So I feel like that deserves like a little pat on the back. Also, another programming note, there's a very good chance, it's almost confirmed, that there will not be Bruins Beat next week. I know. I'll be in Utah. I'll be in Park City, Utah. I'm mentioning this for YouTube because the intro for the podcast edition of this, I will include this in, I think. This is for YouTube and for people who are still listening on the podcast, which hopefully you all are. There will not be a Bruins Beat next week. I'll be in Park City, Utah. The way that the trip lines up just isn't conducive to doing a podcast in advance. Like if I were to do a podcast in advance, it would be done like a few days before, and things change quickly. And I don't just want to rehash all these things. I want to talk about things that like are current, and I don't want you to be listening to stuff that like happened a long time ago. So no Bruins Beat next week. So never fear, maybe re-listen to this, go back and listen to some other stuff, or listen to some other great Bruins podcasts too. There's a lot of good ones out there. So you get a break from listening to me for a week. Maybe that's really bad. Maybe that's really good. Who knows? Hopefully you're really sad about it. Anyways, that is this week's Bruins Beat. Again, doing more Q&As as we go along. I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins Beat listeners have an awesome rest of your week.